Hi, everyone. This is an episode we entitle Coverup at Constantinople, the Tomb of Constantine. What could that be about? Well, we'll see. And it's worthy of the story of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The artifacts that were involved in this are amazing. Um, well, I want to start the story for this account is with the Eastern Orthodox. I'm Protestant. I'm not Eastern Orthodox, but Constantine is a saint to the Eastern Orthodox. And I'm going to ask a question, a subsidiary question. Was he a sheep in wolf's clothing? And this is from St. George Greek Orthodox Cathedral Church. And they're going to basically whitewash him and he gets a pass. But anyway, they asked the question, why did the church give Constantine the title of great? Does a ruthless ruler of the empire deserve such a title? The word ruthless should suggest maybe not, but for some reason, that's not the conclusion. Now, why is he important again? And they relay why he's an important figure in world history. And it's this whole thing about Nicaea. And so let's read what they summarize. I want to use them to bring us all back to reality on who are we talking about? Why do we care about his a mausoleum and his esophagus? We'll see. It says here, Constantine then summoned what has become known as the First Ecumenical Council of the Church. He means the Council of Nicaea, 325. The opening. Now, I want you to notice that he summoned people. And why could he do that? Because he's the Pontifex Maximus over all religions in Rome. You could be the Mithras cult. He can order you to Nicaea, and we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to discuss your doctrine, and we're going to wrap up some things that I think you guys got wrong. He could do that to the Mithraic congregations, right? He could do that because he's the Pontifex Maximus automatically of your religion. You can't say no. He is the high priest. Pontifex Maximus means high priest. So he is the high priest of Christianity in his mind. So Constantine then summoned what has become known as the First Ecumenical Council of the Church. The opening session was held on the 20th of May, 325, in the Great Hall of the Palace at Nicaea. Constantine himself presided. So who's in charge? Is there a bishop of our church involved? No. Why is he presiding? Because he's the high priest. And does anybody tell you that? Why is he assuming this authority? He's not assuming the authority as emperor. He's assuming the authority as the high priest. That's his legal title, Pontifex Maximus. And he gives the opening speech. So he's setting the tone. The council formulated a creed. Oh, really? Was this a voluntary decision on our part? No, as we'll see. But this is depicted. It has to be depicted. He's going to be a saint here. He's going to change the church. He's going to change our beliefs, and we are going to call him a saint. And he's a saint in that religion. Which although it was revised at the Council of Constantinople in 381-82. So in 381 was a council which decided, hey, we can't just have Jesus as God and the Father as God. We need a third God because people are being stubborn about accepting Jesus as God. So if we add a third God, they can't deny there's more than one God in a Godhead. So that's what and then that's literally the reason that Gregory of Nyssa wrote a book, The Great Catechism, explaining we had to destroy the myth, I'm quoting, myth of monotheism, because people were just too stubborn and they wouldn't give in. So we're going to have this third God. I'm paraphrasing now, but they use the term myth of monotheism, and also many times they called it the error about the one. And the Jews have the error about the one, but we have the truth about the two and one, and now we're going to have three and one. So that's what's going on in 381. I'm going to stop that. So that's where the Trinity was first developed. Most people don't know. The Trinity was developed how many years after 325? 56 years later, they find out, you know what, we need a third God in a Godhead. And it became known as the Nicene Creed. It affirms the homosouian, i.e. the doctrine of consubstantiality. So again, I've told you before, in the Council of Nicaea, the very first proposition of Arius was John 17:1-3, to prove that the Father is the only true God, the exact words of Jesus in his prayer to the Father. And eventually nobody could solve this verse. It's too clear. It's too emphatic. But Constantine explained how he brokered the decision to accept Jesus as God. And how did he do that? He came up with this idea of the homosouian doctrine, that God is actually a being with substance, physical substance. He's not a spiritual being like you all think. He has substance, and his consubstantiality was shared with Jesus, and the substance inside of God Yahweh, or Father God, is substance that was from eternity, had no beginning and no end. And therefore, by putting this substance inside of Jesus, this guy, he becomes eternal, and he was an eternal Son of God. And that's why Jesus is God. Okay. That was his explanation. That's how he got around John 17, 1-3. This is actual history, ladies and gentlemen, not made up stuff. This is exactly what he did. And then he explains in his letter to the bishops of Nicaea, bishops who couldn't make it. He said, "This is me. I came up with this great idea, the homosouian doctrine." But I digress. A major role at the council was played at Athanasius by Bishop Alexandria's deacon and secretary, and ultimately the successor, Arius, was condemned. Arius was condemned. He came up with the verse 17, 1-3 from John. He's condemned for quoting scripture. He also brought up Paul's idea that Jesus was an angel. If you read Colossians 1:15-18, Jesus is the first begotten of creation. So he's not God. He's the first begotten. And he then is a co-creator, or actually maybe even the direct creator of the heavens and earth. So Jesus is the first created being after God's existence began eternally. And that's why he said Jesus can't be God, because he was the first begotten of God, relying on Paul. But Paul even loses at this conference, because Constantine wants so badly that Jesus, the Son of God, would be God the Son, because that's what he's been depicting himself as Sol Invictus, this himself, Constantine, and that's a God, the Son of the he's a son of God, who was the God. Anyway, he's a son of a God, so he wanted his Jesus to be just like he thinks he's a God, being God of the Son. Anyway, so that's why he's so important. He changed our religion. He changed fundamentally. He gave a ridiculous explanation, a materialistic explanation, to get around John 17, 1-3. And look it up, everyone. That's the very first thing that Arius put out there, and it couldn't be solved. Nobody, out of hundreds and hundreds of people, nobody could solve it in a legitimate way until the emperor, the Pontifex Maximus, told us how it should be solved. And that's how we got the Trinity. That's how we got the bi-deity of Christ. We got the Trinity 50 some odd years later. All right. So was he a sheep in wolf's clothing? Well, let's listen to this. A few weeks later, now this is St. George Greek Orthodox Cathedral Church. Why he should still be a saint, and he's going to defend him in the end as a saint. A few weeks later, on the day of Pentecost, May 22, Constantine died at Nicomedia, still wearing the white robes of a Christian neophyte. Oh my gosh. Oh, so beautiful. His body was escorted to Constantinople and lay in the state of the imperial palace. Now, what did I say? A sheep in wolf's clothing. That white dress, I insist, is sheep's clothing, my friends. He looks on the outside like a sheep, but he ain't inside. His sarcophagus was then placed in the Church of the Holy Apostles. Now, he created this church, you have to understand, and he was planning, well, you'll see, we're going to get into it later, as he himself had directed it. So he had planned all this. Okay, they're mentioning it. It was surrounded by the memorial steles, which usually means pillars, but it's very clear from other writings, Eusebius in particular, these are other esophagi. These are the tombs of the other apostles he'd been collecting, of the 12. So it was surrounded by the memorial steles of the 12 apostles, making him symbolically the 13th apostle. And that's a lie. That is a explanation. But when you look at the truth, Constantine, is in the middle, and the 12 are all around him. So what is he really saying about who he is? He's not saying he's the 13th apostle, like he's one among 12 equal others. No, he's the center of attention. And we're going to see one guy who gets it right, and that's Professor Wallraff. Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. Okay, so let's continue on. So this writer, whoever, maybe he's a priest, I don't know what, he's the webpage writer at St. George Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Greenville, Greenville, South Carolina. Okay. So this is the verdict. He's going to keep him as a saint, despite murdering and killing his own family. And so does he deserve the title of great? He liberated the Christians from persecution and gave the empire a Christian set of values. Did he? Did he really? I would say making us all idolaters is not a Christian set of values. That is evil. He moved the capital of the empire to a more defensible location, which quickly became the center of Christianity. No, it came the center of pagan Christianity, paganized Christianity. You got it all wrong, buddy. Do you not get upset when people are lying right to your face? And the wealthiest city in the world. Wow, money made it successful. That means it's good. It means God blessed it. He called the First Ecumenical Council of the Church, establishing the pattern by which the church formally dealt with deviations from the teaching of the apostles. Do you know what he means, ladies and gentlemen? Banishment, expropriation of your cash, money, and deprivation of your inheritance. That's what he's talking about. That was all good stuff. If you were a quartodeciman, meaning you believe you celebrate Passover at the time of the Passover instead of at this new vernal equinox that matches this goddess Eustre, and that's where we get the word Easter from her name. Oh no! If you resisted that and you stuck by the apostolic practice of on the 14th of Nisan every year, we would celebrate the Passover and Jesus' resurrection 3 days later. No, you can't do that anymore. And if you want to do that, Constantine made it that you would be denied your inheritance. You would also be potentially not only excommunicated, but you potentially could be exiled. Okay, so this is ridiculous. He's praising this. Your deviation from the teachings of the apostles. These are not, the teachings of the apostles were that you're supposed to keep the 14th of Nisan. Polycarp said, I got this directly from Apostle John. Oh, and we didn't mention that Constantine's major contribution at the Council of Nicaea was to give a long anti-Jewish speech that went on and on and on, and he demanded that we change the worship of Jesus as our King, Messiah, for the resurrection, which we were doing at the time of Passover every year, which is called the 14th day of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar. And then 3 days later, we would celebrate the resurrection. So we were doing that in conjunction with Jewish people. But he said, you can no longer have any days of celebration in common with them. You must change it to the vernal equinox. Now, he didn't tell us why we were doing that, but there's a day of worship of the goddess Easter, or it's in German, it's Ostara, or in Latin, it's Osiris. She's the mother of the god of the sun. So he believes he's the god of the sun, and so it's his spiritual mother. But he's not telling anybody this. He's just saying, you're going to, being Pontifex Maximus, he gave us an order. This was not an optional thing. And so he changed it, and people have protested. No. We received this from the apostles. John, he told us we must celebrate at the 14th day of Nisan, and this became known as the quartodeciman controversy. Quartodeciman is the number 14. So the controversy was, should we go along with what Constantine is ordering us to do, or should we rebel? And of course, the placating bootlickers said, oh, we're just going to go along and just allow him to change our calendar. So he changes the time and the seasons to the Sabbath, the rest from Saturday to Sunday. The god of the sun would be pleased, I'm sure, to have us worshiping on Sunday and resting that day. And he changed the day of honoring Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection from the days that it always was that the apostles had given us, 14th day of Nisan plus 3 for the resurrection. And instead, we will now do it at a vernal equinox date to match a date that coincides with the worship of the goddess, of the mother of the god of the sun, who is really who we're all we're being pushed into a solar religion is what we are, but we're acting like we don't know what's happening to us. And we're just going along because we've got bootlickers running the show, people like Eusebius, who do appear to be bootlickers, although I pray to God he's a secret agent for good. But I don't know. Just my prayer. Anyway, so this ends. In addition to his conversion to Christianity, he was a great ruler, uniting the Roman Empire and looking at the welfare of all people, blah, blah, blah. So this is a whitewash. and you didn't hear anything negative. You didn't hear any of the real murders. He even whitewashed all the things about, deviating from the apostles. Now we have a way of formally dealing with it, but we're going to expel them. And so it's just terrible, terrible man. He's not even a Christian. How can he be a saint? That's just on top of it. It's bonkers. But we're going to show you he can't be a Christian for the very fact is this his esophagus and what he was doing with it in his death, and he planned this all out very carefully. And now Wikipedia, and by the way, you cannot trust Wikipedia as to Christian articles. And you say, "Whoa, isn't Wikipedia like neutral or even liberal left or something like that?" Well, apparently they let people who claim to have authority, they're scholars or they're professors of theology. Apparently, they're the ones writing these things because you're going to read a very corrupt summary here of the burial of Constantine. So this is all it is. And wait, you're going to see a bigger picture as we go. And tell me in your own mind, rewatch this video another day and say, did this Wikipedia article tell you anything about what really happened in the burial of Constantine? So this is what it says. Following his death, his body was transferred to Constantinople and buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles in a porphyry sarcophagus that was described in the 10th century by Constantine VII. Blah, blah. His body survived the plundering of the city during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, but was destroyed at some point afterwards. Constantine was succeeded by his 3 sons, blah, blah, blah. Constantius II is important in there, and it says a number of relatives were killed by the followers of Constantius. Oh, so one of his sons kills the others. Do you realize his children aren't very well behaved? They're not acting like Christians. Well, why do you think that is? Maybe their father isn't a Christian. Notably, Constantine's nephew Domitius, he gets killed, who held the rank of Caesar. So this guy was a Caesar, but the other Caesar kills his brother. And Hannibalianus, also a family member, presumably to eliminate possible contenders to an already complicated succession. So this is a real Christian family going on. You've got murders of 2 brothers by another brother. Oh, my goodness. He also had 2 daughters, Constantina and Helena, wife of the Emperor Julian. Okay, so I wanted you to hear what a former pastor and chaplain said, Williams. And sometimes you need to know that as long as someone actually works for a church and is getting paid cash and has incentive to misrepresent the truth, you don't hear the truth. But I think when they finally retire, they may tell you the truth. So this is what he says, a little bit of a hint. He died in 337. He was buried there in the only finished church in his new designer city. So there was only one church. And you're going to see he had a special purpose for it, and wasn't to have people show up and worship at all. And this is the capital of Constantinople. It was called the Church of the 12 Apostles. Sounds profound. The church seems to have been erected with the intent of bringing together all the bodies of the 12 apostles to be buried there in a circle of tombs surrounding the central sarcophagus of Constantine. So again, this is key. The way this is laid out is 12 sarcophagus go in the circle and 1 in the center, and that was for Constantine. And that was his plan, and that's why he set up the church. And we'll see that was something he planned long in advance and kept private, according to Eusebius, but then revealed at the end that's what he intended. He wanted to be the center sarcophagus in the middle. And this is in a standing structure adjacent to the church building proper. So there's a church building, and then there's this adjacent mausoleum type thing with the 12 apostles sarcophagi. And this, when Constantine dies, then there will be a central sarcophagus with his own body inside of it at the center of the 12 apostles. Okay, I think and this is interesting, is, just for historical fact, is his whole plan of creating this thing, as fate would have it, the Crusades and all these things caused his tomb to be vandalized and destroyed, and all that's left of Constantine and his great tomb, and this is such justice of God, the founder of New Rome is a mere small fragment of a royal purple-colored stone, the porphyry stone that he used to depict himself as Apollo god in that Constantine column of Apollo. Well, he had this esophagus in the same color porphyry, and it's the only little piece that God allowed to remain. And you know why? Because then you can see this man was using the same color for his esophagus that he used for his column, which had him depicted as Apollo, the god of the sun, sun in the sky. So he intended you to link him to God the Son in the sky by using the same porphyry, very unique, a mineralized stone. It's this purple stone. It's literally permanently purple. That's how it comes out of the ground. So he was doing this for a reason, ladies and gentlemen. He was doing this for a reason, and it can still be seen there today in the local archaeological museum in Istanbul. So ultimately, all that can be said is that Constantine's final burial place is a mystery still to be resolved, meaning we don't know where the hell his body is. Oh, I used the word hell. Maybe that's where it is. That's my belief, but that's just me. Now, Mark Johnson is a professor of art history, and sometimes I often find that you learn things from people who are not formally in a church or pastors or whatever, because they're not at risk of losing their jobs or being criticized or being demoted if they tell you the truth about something. And also, an art history person is looking at this mausoleum with an artistic eye in mind, like what's the purpose, what's the depictions, what's the graphics and all that, what's the visual art involved. So you get a very good perception from somebody who's not blinded by bias and orthodoxy of doctrine. Mark Johnson, professor of art history, gave a speech. He dedicated his career to studying Constantine's period, especially the emperor's final resting place, the Church of the Holy Apostles, also known as the Apostolion. Built in the 4th century AD, the building served as both a church and his own mausoleum. As a recipient of the 2016 PA Christensen Lectureship, Johnson delivered a special lecture in which he explained the structure, interior, and message of this building, now no longer standing but still full of knowledge to be gleaned. Now, this is an article by Samuel Wright entitled Reassessing Constantine's Tomb. The webpage is there at the bottom, humanities.byu.edu, and he's doing a summary of the art professor Mark Johnson's speech. So he obviously was present and he was taking notes. So this is what he says. Though the Apostolion was not a reproduction of a mausolea past, he did take inspiration from their design. So again, this is art history. You'll know they're fascinated, like why is it laid out the way it is? Johnson explained that according to Eusebius, Constantine's contemporary and really his autobiographer, quote, Constantine started building it as a church to honor the apostles, but kept hidden the fact that he intended to be buried in it as well until later. This is Eusebius. This is the only negative comment you can ever find in Eusebius, because to me that he's telling you he was deceiving me. Because I think Eusebius probably went out and tried to grab all these. The mission was to get all the apostles' burial remains and bring them to Constantinople and put them in these 12 sarcophagi. Okay. He added, meaning Eusebius added, what Constantine started to build was a structure, the design of which was entirely appropriate for a church, both in architectural form and size. I think this is actually the professor, not Constantine, and not Eusebius anymore. So Professor Johnson added, what Constantine started to build was a structure, the design of which was entirely appropriate for a church, both in architectural form and in size, while also being appropriate architecturally to serve as an imperial mausoleum. So it basically had the idea that it's going to be a mausoleum, but it also had architecture that would allow it to be used as a church in conjunction. And I think what that means is the church place where people could gather was conjoined, somehow closely connected. So there's a mausoleum, and maybe it was there were hallways that were shared, and so it wasn't a separate building. The mausoleum, it was kind of integrated with the building. So that's an architectural thing. That's an art issue. The interior furnishings furthered the building's dual purpose. At some point, relics of the apostles, and this is funny, Andrew and Luke were added to accompany those of Timothy, though the emperor had intended to have all of the apostles represented. Now, this is why I say it's great to have an art history professor telling you this, because how would you ever learn that Constantine doesn't even know the names of the apostles? Andrew's the only one in that list there that is an apostle. But it apparently doesn't matter. Just get Luke, get Timothy, and Apostle Andrew, and throw them in a box, and we're good to go. So 3 were there apparently, but not anymore. So that's the other thing, is there's a esophagus for all the 12 apostles, but were all the remains in all of those? It's not known, but except for these 3, Andrew, the quote Apostle Luke, the Apostle Timothy. Poor Eusebius that he has to put up with this. All right. All right, next page. Constantine transferred the apostles' relics to his church, a revolutionary move that set precedent for future cathedrals. The act, quote, demonstrated both the imperial power he held and his own particular view about himself and his place in Christianity. That is, Constantine viewed himself in some respects as a, now this is important, 13th apostle by right of the work he had done on Christianity's behalf. And by the way, I think it's bad enough that he would think that he's the 13th apostle, but that's not what's going on here. That's not what's going on. He is at the center. Remember I told you that's how it was depicted? He is the center esophagus. That was the plan. And what is that? He's not a 13th equal. He is saying he's making himself out to be Christ. Why would that be so? If Constantine convinced us at Nicaea in 325 that Jesus Christ is God, right? And Constantine believes he is God. Is it a huge leap to believe that Constantine believed he is the Christ that we are worshiping? And when we worship Christ, we're really worshiping Constantine? Is that not his objective? Is that not what his objective was all along with his taking influence and control over Christianity? He wasn't trying to become a better Christian and a humble guy. He was trying to be, I'm going to get these people to ultimately worship me, whether they know it or not is neither here nor there, but I'll get them around long term. I'm going to convince them to worship the God of the Son. And by doing that, they'll be worshiping me when they finally get revealed all these truths. So, anyway, so why is Constantine in the center if he's the 13th apostle? And then here we'll get into that in a minute when Professor Wallraff at page 264 of his article that we discussed in a prior episode will show you. He says that his esophagus, Constantine's esophagus, is at the center of the other 12 all around. Here's the Samuel Wright summary closing. And he closed his remarks, meaning Professor Johnson, Mark Johnson. Johnson described the Church of the Holy Apostles as, quote, a shrine to the apostles, the tomb of some of them, right? There's not all of the tombs have yet been filled, and perhaps the intended tomb of all of them. Well, obviously it was. There's 12, as well as the tomb of the emperor. It stood as a witness to the faith of the apostles and that of Constantine. Did he have faith, really? Yeah, he had faith in himself as God, as Christ, but not as a 13th apostle. That's not what he's doing. He's not he's not in the outside of the circle. He's in the middle of the circle, as well as the emperor's view that his status in life and his accomplishments gave him the right to share in the honor accorded the apostles. No, my friends, he didn't want to share in the equal honor of the 12 apostles whom he surrounded himself with. He wanted himself to be worshipped as the center of their attention. So into eternity, he wanted the 12 to be rotating around himself, not himself rotating around Christ. The only thing that might have made sense is, I mean, theoretically, if he'd put a cross in the middle of 13 esophagi, funeral boxes, but he didn't do that. He put himself at the center of the 12, esophagi that were meant for 12. Maybe there were only 3 or 4 at that point. Anyway, so now I want to turn to Wallraff's article, and we've seen this before, so I'm gonna jump out, but you're gonna see he's gonna say the Imperial Sarcophagus, meaning Constantine's esophagus, was in the middle of the 12 holy mountains, and we'll get into this issue, mountains, or what is meant by that. Okay, and so this is the article, Constantine's Devotion to the Sun after 324, Martin Wallraff. You can find this online just by searching. And you should find it if you search that title. This should come up. It was published in volume 34 of Studia Patristica in 2001. It was a papers presented at the 13th International Conference on Patristic Studies. And he is a Protestant. He lists himself as a Protestant evangelical theologian at Munich University in Germany. And okay, so let's go back to this is a tight quote of this. The Imperial Sarcophagus, meaning the funeral box, was in the middle of 12 holy monuments, or stelae is what others call it. But bottom line is they were boxes. that were intended to hold the apostles. So you can put that in what you could call it a monument, something to remember somebody by. So it doesn't necessarily have to be as you and I think of it today as a coffin. So we're not entirely understanding what shape it was. Was it a pillar? You can use a pillar as a monument. You can put the remains of a decedent inside of a box, literally, and it be a monument. So we conceive of it in maybe a certain way that makes us think that it has to be like a coffin, and that's why I'm not using the coffin. I'm using the word esophagus. So in that ancient world, we don't understand how they would perceive what is the place we put our decedents. It's not the same necessarily as we do it. So it could be a box, it could be a square box, it could be a long box, it could be a tall box, but it's still a box, and it's intended to reflect the person inside of it. And these were the 12 boxes of supposedly the 12 apostles, but as I showed you, apparently Constantine didn't know the difference between Timothy and Luke and an apostle. Okay. So the imperial sarcophagus was in the middle of the 12 monuments or boxes, which in Eusebius' interpretation are symbols of the 12 apostles. So Eusebius didn't miss what it was. He was saying that's what this represented. Now, this is Professor Wallraff talking, and this is at page 264 of the article. If you downloaded it, it's got pagination on it. From a Christian perspective, the problem was that this clearly implied an identification of the emperor with Christ. Okay, so this whole idea is the 13th apostle is a made up nonsense. It's not, it was never said by Constantine. The only thing you know is he planned this to be where he was the central sarcophagus. And what did, let's go back. What did Eusebius tell you? Constantine started building it as the church to honor the apostles, but kept hidden the fact that he intended to be buried in it as well until later. So Eusebius had no idea that the center of the circle where would be for Constantine's esophagus. So there's no way you would think that he wants to be the 13th apostle. That would put him around the periphery. And maybe you put an emblem or a monument to Christ in the middle, like a cross or something. But this is designed for Constantine to be worshipped as Christ, where the 12 are worshiping him. Okay. Now, what's interesting is Professor Wallraff says the problem was the emperor appears to want himself to be worshipped as Christ. How is this problem resolved? After his death, contrary to his wishes, the problem was resolved at a later period by the removal of the emperor's sarcophagus. So we're just going to take it out of there. That's disgusting. So you see, our own leaders knew what he was trying to do was to not portray himself as a 13th apostle. And if that were so, well, why didn't we just move it over to be one of the right next to the 12 in that circle? No, we took it completely out. Somebody had good sense that this man is not a Christian. He's not a believer. He's a pagan. He wanted us to worship him as Christ. Get this box out of here and burn it. That's what I would have done. Burn it. I wouldn't maybe do that, but I'd bury it somewhere, but in an unmarked grave. And this is reflected in John Chrysostom, a bishop, I think, in the early church in the late 300s. Okay, and I just want to finish where you have a visualization of what this mausoleum looked like, so you can understand that when he puts himself at the center, he's putting them in the center of something that looks like these things. So that's on the left is a standard mausoleum in the Roman time period, and we see the layout or the diagram to the right. We would also see here is another example. This is the mausoleum is supposedly for Constanza, the daughter of Constantine. So this is built in the time of Constantine, but in his time it was known as the Temple of Bacchus, but it served the purpose also could be a mausoleum. Anyway, I do find though it's interesting. This has always been known as the Temple of Bacchus. And so Piranesi took issue with other scholars who, according to the title of this image itself, have erroneously attributed the building as the Temple of Bacchus. Uh, Now, what's interesting about the Bacchus connection, just for point of reference, so he makes a big deal. Oh, it's erroneously called the Temple of Bacchus, but that's how it was known for a long time before you stood in there, Mr. Piranesi. Well, the reason I find it interesting is that in Acts 25:14, Paul quotes his Jesus, actually quoting from the play Bacchae, where it says it's hard to kick against the pricks. And it turns out this is a direct quotation from the play by Euripides from 406 before the Christian era called the Bacchae. And and this is where Jesus is actually speaking out the role of the Greek god Dionysius, which is a son of God who's loses his godhood kind of and has to come to earth and suffer as a man and be killed and everything like that. But he resurrects. So this is a kind of a sick quotation, if you ask me, to use and put in the mouth of Jesus. And we know it's a direct quote of the play because the word prick there is using a plural, which you wouldn't need to say normally in Greek, but by putting it in the plural, it fits the original meter of the play. So as they say, it's because it uses the plural for pricks, it proves that it's a direct quote from the play. So somebody who knows the play put this in the words of Jesus. Do you think Jesus would quote a pagan play about a dying God, a son of God of a in a paganistic plurality of gods, and who dies, suffers, and resurrects again? I mean, he has his guts all eaten out by creatures and stuff. I mean, it's kind of sick to think of, and that's what Paul came up with. That's the best he could come up with, in this situation. But anyway, I find it interesting that this, temple was called the Temple of Bacchus, and it must have been made ordered, constructed by Constantine. And so you just have these, what do I call it? What can I call them? Just people who just whitewash everything. "Oh, this was to his daughter Constanza," How do you know that? He just makes it up, and you're supposed to believe anything that whitewashes this guy. But he did the last thing he did that connects to his own esophagus at the, Church of the 12 Apostles is this Temple of Bacchus, which oddly enough connects to back to the story of Paul and has a connection there too. So it's interesting, just something to mention and note. Okay, anyway, that's the end of this episode. Hopefully we see that there's no way on God's green earth that Constantine is a Christian. How could he be? He thinks he's Christ. There's only one Christ, and it ain't Constantine, and he wants people to worship him, to have the 12 apostles put in a position of appearing that they're worshiping him. They're surrounding him in death about him. So they're worshiping him, focusing all their attention on Constantine. And so that cannot be a Christian by definition. He's a pagan. And and then that fits in with all the other evidence that he's really believing that he's the God of the sun in the sky, and therefore he needs to be worshiped, and therefore we can now see through what he did. His death is in 337, and so 12 years earlier at Nicaea, he made us believe that Jesus, the Son of God, is God the Son, and that means that Constantine, wanted us to believe Christ was God because ultimately he wanted us to believe that Constantine himself was Christ. Therefore, if we believe Constantine was Christ embodied somehow, we would then accept Constantine as God Almighty of the universe. Sad but true. Okay, everyone. Hope that explains everything. There is no way Constantine's a Christian. He's the enemy of Christ. He's an antichrist. Change the time, the seasons, the time of Passover, the days to honor Jesus were changed to include December 20. I mean, well, that was later. Anyway, he has corrupted our church to no end. Got rid of Passover for sure, and change the times in the seasons. Oh, and he got rid of the Sabbath on Shabbat, on Saturday. And now it's on Sunday, the God of the Sunday that he wanted worshipped. And he ordered that in 321 AD when he still wasn't coming out that he was a Christian supposedly all these years. Okay, everyone, take care. God bless. Ciao. Bye.